Good morning. We're here at Kenosha Public Museum at the 49th Annual Transparent Watercolor Society exhibition. We have our two jurors, Matthew Bird and Brienne Brown. And they're going to walk us through and give us a little gallery walk and give us some of their thoughts on some of the paintings here. And we're thrilled to have them both here at the same time, and we're thrilled to be here.
And good morning, everyone. We're going to start with our Skyledge Award winner. But before I really talk a little bit about that, I just wanted to mention what an incredible show this was in general and how hard it was for both of us to jury the show. Fortunately, we weren't in contact with each other at all during the process, but found out that we really lined up exceptionally well in our approach and style to jurying. And for me, I'll speak to how I look at shows and select shows a little bit, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but obviously fundamentals of painting are the foundation of jurying, and so value, color, composition, design, all those basics are very important. But I've found the show like this at a national level, that stuff's just kind of a given. Everyone's kind of nailed the basics. So we start looking for parts of a painting that kind of go to another level, that speak to you, ask questions, maybe more contemplative, and you're drawn to a story or an intriguing aspect that's more than, sometimes you can't even put your finger on, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So the Skyledge Award, this is Stephen Zong's painting. I just found this to be incredibly lovely, especially seeing it in person. It's another tricky thing, when you're picking shows, you don't always see the size of things. So seeing this, how, life-size and vibrant and colorful it was very striking to me, but also I was drawn to the subtle contemplation, not just in the figure and the pose, but in the color palette. Just lovely, warm, and cool grays throughout with this poppy red vest that this person's wearing. And in my own work, I'm often drawn to portrait and figures that are kind of in their own world. In their own world, lost in thought, contemplating something you don't really know, but they're just, as opposed to going up to someone and saying, hey, can I take your picture? And they're all going to be like, yes. I'm much more fascinated by people that are in their own thoughts and doing their own thing. And I very much feel that here. I get this wonderful presence in the face. Obviously, this is the focal point, but also as my eye comes down here to these clasped hands, it's just the dignity and strength that I'm seeing. And I don't know what this person's thinking about, but they've lived a life, and maybe it's the end of the day. I start, thinking about the story, like what are they thinking? What have they been through? So compositionally, I do like how my eye moves between those two focal points. And the brushwork, I think, is just amazing in this painting. I've seen Stephen paint before, and he's very intentional in his brushwork, which you might not intuit by looking at his work. It might look very random or sporadic or quick, but he paints very slowly and deliberately, and will hover his brush over the painting and then make the mark that he wants to make. So that I just find fascinating, that you can have these marks that look, they all come together to form a beautiful whole, but they're also just very thought out. And the color choices are lovely, and I love the background that he's used. It's not too dark, but it gives it a nice contrast so that portrait, the profile of that face really pops out of the background with just subtle details, and the edges in the face, the lost and found edges you hear people talk about with watercolor a lot, having the crisp lines in certain areas and then soft and diffused in others. Like with the hair, for example, it's there, but it's not there kind of thing. So all these things are just masterfully done, and he's an expert in the medium. So congratulations to Stephen. All right, so this is Louis Perez, an artist that I was not familiar with, but just fell in love with this painting because there's a tranquil, quiet stillness to this that I could just sit and look at for a while. It's obviously expertly painted from a technical perspective. The realism is fantastic. I love, love, love all the textures. I assumed that this was like a thatched roof, but his title's For Pete's Sake, so maybe it's Pete, I don't know. But the textures are beautiful, from the roof to the stone wall and the grass. And the striking thing for me is the placement of the items that you're looking at. So, I mean, this obviously draws your eye, but that little tiny bird up there just balances everything out beautifully, and my eye is going around and seeing how that balances out with these strong horizontal lines. It's really well thought out in place as far as the design and the composition. Love the high contrast with this one as well, the dark against the light. I would maybe make the sky a little bit more punched up, but that's just me. But that little bird there adds a touch of life to the painting, which I think adds a tremendous amount. It would still be a wonderful painting without that, but that little bit of life really makes it more interesting to me, that bird could just fly off at any moment. But yeah, I just love this painting so much. All right, this is Alicia Shay's painting. It's called The Rising Tide. This was one early on when I first saw it in the selection process that struck me, and I was like, this could be a real winner if it looks this good in person. I am a still life painter, so perhaps I'm slightly partial in that regard, but this is a different level still life than what I do. I love that there's this real narrative story element to this. It's not just random objects on a table being painted. There's obviously a very deliberate selection in her items as far as the color and the placement to tell a story. So we got water with the blue thread, yellow sun up here, and this paper boat. Even one of the buttons has an anchor on it, which I think is a brilliant little touch. And I just think it's so clever. There's pencil handwriting on the paper that's been folded up, which I love that kind of mystery, because I looked at it for a while. I don't really know what it says or what story it's telling, which is intriguing to me.
I do. If you want to know.
Well, so I was thinking about this, and I was like, well, would I want to know? Maybe I like that mystery. And yeah, we can talk about it. I'd love to hear the backstory. But I kind of liked not knowing that there's something personal about that I'm kind of getting a little view into, but the mystery is also kind of part of it for me, which was kind of fun. Obviously, it's executed perfectly. The technical ability of pulling off realism to this degree is very impressive. I mean, we're talking about painting threads, for crying out loud. It's a masterful painting. And yeah, what else? Composition's nice. Love the warm and the cools. Also very much appreciate that she did so much variation in her color. It's got blue and yellow, yes, but they're not all the same blue. It's not the same yellow or gold. So that was a very nice touch as well. If this were all like the same kind of thread, not the same painting, right? If it was just the same blue, it would not have the same impact. So I love that thoughtful choice. And the way these things are sort of stacked kind of randomly, but yet also feel like they're very intentionally placed there, obviously, because she's telling a story. I think that there's some skill in pulling that off as well. These are not all equally the same size, placed, and everything's arranged in a way that doesn't just, your eye doesn't just die in the bottom. There's lots of things to look at and bounce around, and lots of details to appreciate as you stare at this longer and longer, which I invite you to do, because there's a lot there. So, all right.
Okay, so some of the paintings I chose to talk about, I'm going to be, a lot of what Matthew said, I totally agree with when he talks about what we look for when choosing the, acceptance, and that kind of stuff. Of course, Matthew did the awards, but we were very similar, even though we did not talk, on some of the things we look for. And a lot of that, for me, is definitely the fundamentals. I look for, are they proficient in the style that they've chosen to paint in? I love all different kinds of styles. I, of course, am not a super realistic painter. I'm more impressionistic, but I love the spectrum. I love them all the way from abstract to super realistic. The key thing for me that I really focus on, especially at this level where everyone, like Matthew said, is very technically good, right? All paintings in here are technically good. But what then sets them above the others? That's where you kind of look for things. And for me, one of those is intentionality. So Matthew's already spoken on a couple of what we've seen so far. Is the artist intentionally making their composition to guide you throughout the painting? Are there colors used intentionally? Textures and line, shape, value, all those elements, but are they intentionally placed, even if it's still trying to look realistic? So this is an example of that. So this painting, I remember seeing it online, and I was like, okay, fine, looks good, and I kept moving. And this is one of those that I kept coming back to, and I'm like, why do I keep looking at this? But what it is look at the just slightly off-center nature of every shape. And to me, that is very intentional. So here you see these bright red doors that are really going to they're going to grab your attention because it's a unique color. And then it's also, you get some, mimicking of it throughout the painting as well. But see how they're slightly off center, right? Then you have the pole that's also slightly off center. You have the stairwell that's not totally centered, but it feels like it is, but it's not. And so it's just those subtle things that make you want to look at the painting more and kind of study it. Even the people, which I was always told, if you have figures in your painting, never have them walking out. I don't agree with that, and here's a great example. Because even though I've always heard, oh, they're walking out, you're gonna leave. Well, no, because there's lots of other elements that are bringing you right back on. And the people, they're turned away from you. You don't see their faces, they're not straight on. They're shapes, and these shapes help to mimic a lot of what's going throughout the painting, even though it's all realistic. So little things like that make this even better. Like even the bottom, which seems very even, like it's just a rectangle, it's slightly skewed on both sides. Just look, if you study this, every single shape, down to even the bricks that look like they're all painted exact, are subtly off. Even the number 525 and a half, 525. I mean, just the whole thing, as I saw it in person, especially the size also impacts. But that's what kept bringing me back to this painting, that intentionality. So that's what I liked about this one. So with this painting, same type of thing I'm looking for is the intentional nature of the composition and how they've composed all of the elements. This is, when you first look at it, it definitely looks abstract. It's very abstracted, but yet it is hyper realistic. Because if you go up close, you see, okay, no, this is a crack in wall, and then you've got these shadows that are coming off screen that are, you know, softening a lot of these edges. So it is a realistic scene, but what I love about it is the intentionality. Look at the color choices. Really, really warm up top, right? That's just gonna draw your eye because it's different than the other cooler, more neutral colors, but that are throughout the painting. And then look at this little hot piece of leaf that's just on a ledge. It's one warm spot that echoes and balances out that warm color compared to the rest of the painting. You also have subtle warms down here, but notice how they're not as intense. They're not as saturated. So it still provides that balance, kind of like this triangle balance here, but it's not drawing the attention. It's not like stealing the show, right? So you still have some of those warm leaves, but it's not as hot as that or that. You know, so there's, again, intentionality in how these things are designed. Of course, you have the strong vertical, and that is a major element. But then you have all of these subtle diagonals and horizontals that help guide you through. And then you have this wonderful, just soft shadow that's kind of just laid on top of that. It doesn't draw your eye until you come up close. And it's just this softness that helps to darken down here, bright and brilliant up here, echoing the verticals, but not as strong. There's just a lot of really good compositional focus on those elements to create this painting, still keeping it hyper-realistic and yet abstract. Because here's the thing, whether you're doing a pure abstract painting to the whole spectrum in between, to highly representational, we all have the same elements to work with. Line, value, shape, color, and texture. How we arrange them makes the difference, whether you're doing totally highly rendered or non-representational completely. It all matters. And so that's the type of thing that I look for no matter what the style is. All right, so I wanted to talk about this one too. This was another one that my first glance, I was just like, no, okay, you know, but then it's one that I kind of kept coming back to, and now I see it in person, I like it even better. it's fascinating to me because, okay, there's a lot of thoughts and things that this artist chose that is intentional and goes with his story, right? So his story, the title is Color Drain, right? So you've got all this top real life happening that's all in, neutral, monotone colors, basically. It kind of looks like that, and all the color is in the reflection. Okay, but compositionally, that all makes sense. So you have this really, see these strong lines that bring you to this point. But yet there's not much going on there, right? So it's really hard when you have really strong lines like that to then not have your center of interest right where I expect it. But what does the artist do? Well, he softens everything here, and he's going to do something else, use something of the principles of art to help guide your eye throughout the painting. One way is contrast. The darkest things in the painting are these shapes. They're also the different shapes in the painting. So even though we have these strong diagonals, he softens this and brings you back here, because this is where you want to look. But then the color brings you down. Why? Because it's different. The different element, whatever it is, if you have a lot of something, a little of something else, your eye's going to go there. We can use contrast of value to do this. We can do contrast of color, shape, line, texture, all those elements you have to play with. It's not just one. Sometimes you can use multiple. Sometimes one's really dominant, right? So this one uses shape as well as color and value to kind of do this. And so it's just fascinating to me. Even I love the fact that it goes with the story, but the design, there's a lot of, I love seeing compositions that break a little of what you expect, but yet do it successfully. And that's what I found intriguing about this painting.
I love those kind of paintings where the more you spend time with them, they open up mysteries and stories to you and reveal more. And it is very abstract, an abstract painting. But when it kind of clicks and you see, oh, there's a figure reflected in here that's looking into water, that there's fish and leaves in the water. And you're like, wow, there's a lot going on here that I did not initially see or notice. And I love that. I love that it kind of unraveled itself gradually. So often we see stuff that's just, oh, well, that's what that is. But rarely do I come across paintings that can gift little bits the more you spend time with them. So, yes, we have very crisp edges in the figure, and once you see it, you can't not see it. So that's also kind of fun. Like, you can't go back and necessarily see it the way, at least I can't, the way I first saw it. Once I start seeing the story and seeing the figure here, it's hard to unsee. And the soft way that these leaves are painted wet into wet, they're not immediately noticeable as leaves until you start piecing them together and realizing what's going on. And then you see there's some fish in here. Lots of technique with the splatter and great brushwork in creating those soft edges with the hard, crisp lines. The way this shape is very unique. It's not normally how I would move the eye, but it does work here. And I think part of it is the story and the mystery of the painting, where I might kind of go off. I keep coming around to find new little bits. so that is one of the reasons why I chose this painting.
Okay, so I really wanted to talk about Dean Mitchell's painting here. You know, of course, I love his work. I've seen a lot of his work, so this is another just one of those examples. He's really good at a lot of things, but portraits, he's able to capture people's expression stories within his portraiture that I just find there's a lot of feeling in it a lot of the times. But the other thing I wanted to talk about when I saw this in person is I'm going to talk about surprises in composition. One thing that I love is you look at when Dean Mitchell, when he does portraits, you can look at his background. And his background is usually, it's very abstracted, it's subtle, because all your eye is going to be going to the figure. But yet there's variety within this background, but you're not going to capture, I didn't see it on digitally. When you put it and see it in person, you can see the subtle washes, and it's just beautiful. Now, I love neutrals, I love grays, so I'm also drawn to that. But look at the way he's designed the figure in this 2D space. All in the corner, and you have this wonderful neutral warm, you know, of the hat and the face down to the arm. And where is your most intense hue? On the bird, right? That is also where the darkest and the lightest shapes are meeting. And so we know where he wants us to look. And it's not necessarily the face. The face is, you know, subtle. It's soft edges. Nothing's catching the eye. Like he's not having white eyes that would draw, you know, this figure's not doing that. This is about their relationship. You know, it's titled, right, Rowena and Her Little Friend, right? So we know it's about this conversation. But beyond that, the way he's composed his shapes and the value and the different color or intensity matters. But then looking throughout, as you look at it in person, there's these spots of blue, there, and there. And it's one of those things, again, with color, he's using color to also go throughout this wonderful shape. And the fact that the arm, I love the sweep of the arm that continues down to the finger and right the tip at the very edge of the paper, which I wouldn't necessarily do all the time. That's like, you know, it's like a tangent almost, where you're like, point, I'm right at the edge, right there. But look what the negative shape that's created is an arrow, triangle, that brings you back. It's saying, no, look here. So he's thoughtful in his negative spaces as well as the positive spaces. He's intentional, not doing this by accident, okay? Now, he might just be so good he does it naturally, but still, there's also the subtle texture and pattern. It's not huge, but it's a different thing back here that's just another thing to joy to look at, but that doesn't take away. There's just so many little subtle things in here, and it shows you how you can use subtle shifts and subtle changes in all those elements to help guide the eye. He's a master at this. So it's definitely a painting worth studying and delving more deeply into looking beyond just the subject. The subject is great, so not saying that, but more to it than that. So that's what I love looking at this one more. So I wanted to talk about this painting because it really shows an example of how you can use texture to guide the eye through. So we've seen a lot of different examples of using color and shape and value, and this one, they do a really good job of using some of those elements, but also texture. So if you look at the center of where they're really interested, the texture on her scarf around her hat and around her face is the most intense color. It's the strongest. There's harshest lines, but then there's texture back here in the back. But see how it's subtle? You know, but it draws, we kind of want to look here. There's lots going on here. Then you will look here. But then the subtle texture in her dress is subdued. So she could have made it, this artist could have made it just as strong as this. And it might have been, color-wise, right? Could have been a strong hue, strong edges. But if they'd done that, then you're not guiding things. You're not making intentional choices. You're just copying what you're seeing. Then you've got this little spot that's a little more harsh than this, right? Brighter colors. So that's another place to look. But you get drawn back to, you know, the red. You've got the red here, red here. There's lots of these elements that she's putting through that helps you move through the painting. And one, I just really love the texture, because look at these. Notice how the bunches of vegetables and fruit, right, are spots of color, but nothing's highly textured. The texture is saved for certain areas, and then how the texture's handled is different throughout the painting to help you move through it in the way the artist intends. The back legs back here, I don't know what color pants they had or anything like that. I doubt it was those colors. Honestly, maybe it was, but that to me is very intentional. There's something going on here, very subtle, but it doesn't draw away from the point. It doesn't draw away from her story, from her design. It all balances out. Again, it's not a problem of having many shapes throughout your painting. It's, do they support your main actor? You need like a main actor or a couple, but then you need supporting actors. And the supporting actors shouldn't detract, they should support. And so this, I thought, was just nicely done in using texture for doing that.
All right, this is Ted Nuttall's painting. It is a lovely portrait. I love Ted's paintings. He's got such a unique style. It's, I don't know, you could say often imitated, never duplicated. But he's always pushing his portrait and his painting style further and further, which I really appreciate. And I think this is a great example of that. So it's called Touching Picasso. And I just love the juxtaposition of the, well, two portraits, right? So the more classic Nuttall style portrait, and then kind of the infusion of Picasso in the background here. And it's almost like the Picasso is coming out of the imagination of the figure, perhaps, or maybe she's stepping away from that deconstructed Picasso figure. I'm gonna say something controversial that I'm probably not supposed to say as artists, but never really loved Picasso. I respect his genius and all of his contributions, but his work just never really has connected with me, generally speaking. But I find this very fascinating because there is a fusion between the deconstruction that he would do and then the more warm portrait that Ted's known for creating. And so that tension I find very fascinating. And I also really am intrigued by the way he's framed this and cropped it in, right above the mouth. It's as if we are seeing a a thought, or she's stepping away from this Picasso-esque background painting. And the brush marks, I think, are lovely. Each of these lines is like two lines. It's a thick line and a thin line in the middle, which is very interesting to me. They're not perfectly smooth. So from a distance, you might think, oh, these are just brush marks that are fluid, but they're not. There's thick and thin, there's jagged edges. So they're very intentional the way that he did it. It wasn't how I think of Picasso working. I think Ted's obviously bringing his own style to an interpretation of what a Picasso drawing or painting would look like. But that's also fascinating. So I kind of get lost in the abstraction of the line and the color, the way that we have warm and cools and lovely grays just within a line. It's not just the same color throughout the whole line, and the textures, you kind of blur your eye a little bit and squint, and you see lots of wonderful negative shapes, and then you can refocus, and oh yeah, there's the face. It's obviously a Picasso-style portrait, but what a difference in the more realistic portrait. Still using the same color palette, but this is much warmer versus this is a cooler. So there's that lovely balance, and the fact that, with a Picasso, you never really know where they're looking. Their eyes are kind of going all cockeyed. So the connection to the viewer, I think, is the final touch that kind of just grabs you. She's just looking right at you, and she's a beautiful, beautiful portrait. I love the way these eyes are rendered, and classic, not all painting blotches. I don't know what he calls them, but that's yeah. So that's why I love this painting.
Okay, so this is the final painting we'll be discussing today. And this one, I loved seeing digitally and I love seeing in person. You can really see, the other thing you can see in person that you can't get digitally is the brushwork. You can really study the brushwork, the transparency. And this is just, it's a beautiful painting. It's a beautiful abstracted view, very impressionistic. But again, as far as intention goes, you've got these shape of the boats. One is definitely rendered better. You have better shape control over one than the other side ones. But more importantly as well, you've got the most intense, the different color right there in pretty close to the middle of the painting, right? Which is, again, one of those things that is like, no, don't do. But guess what? He can do that because the other shapes around it, so you've got this dark, dark shape. That's the darkest shape here that's highlighting and really defining that main boat. And that contrast is going to help bring you and move you throughout the painting. Usually it's a problem when people put something in the center, because then they have no movement and it becomes static. So it's not that center is bad, but it's what are you going to do throughout the thing? How are you going to move the eye throughout the painting if you only have something in the center, right? So that's the thing you really want to think about. But here, they mimic some of that color here, but the most intense still brings you back to this one spot. But there's other places to look at as you go throughout the painting. Here, I mean, this feels very quiet, deceptively, but it's not, because the contrast, there's lower contrast, right? So you still have a lot of that busy shape making, but yet because it's lower contrast, it's a quieter area, opposed to all of the little more higher contrast areas that are busier. So again, you're using a little bit of that texture to also guide the eye. So this painting's using several things to move you throughout. Not as representational or highly rendered as some others that we've seen, but just as successful because of the intention of where they place their elements and what they do with them. So that is the main thing that I look for and what I strive in my paintings too. We all strive for, but it's interesting to see the different paintings and the different ways they do this masterfully, I really think, and a lot of these are really good paintings. So thanks for everything, and I hope this gallery walk was helpful. Matthew and I really enjoyed during the show, and like he said, it was hard, but we also had a lot of fun. So thanks again, and we'll see you next year.